Hallo und herzlich willkommen zurück. Das ist die 11. Lektion in unserer Reise durch die deutsche Sprache. Also dann, if you recall, at the end of our last lesson, I left you with a riddle. I asked you to consider, wie viele Zecke hat der Bierdeckel in Deutschland? Die Antwort? Es gibt viele Zecke. Let me share at least two of these with you. Because, unbeknownst to most people outside of the German-speaking world, these little pieces of cardboard actually serve important financial and even social-political purposes. For instance, in many establishments, the bartender or server will use the front or back side of the Bierdeckel to keep track of how many drinks you order, and even to tally up your final bill. So, by the end of an enjoyable evening out with your friends, your Bierdeckel might end up looking like this one. Puh! Now that is what I call an enjoyable night out with friends. Meine Güte. But let me tell you, the usefulness of the Bierdeckel extends beyond the pub itself. Coasters have even been used to promote social progressivism. In parts of Germany, local governments and political parties have even teamed up with breweries and coaster makers to circulate humanitarian messages through Bierdeckel-Kampagnen. In 2016, for instance, the German state of Saxony started its own coaster campaign called Vorurteile, Nachfragen, ein Bierdeckel erklärt. One of these Bierdeckel series printed a common Vorurteil on one side of the coaster, for example, Ausländer sind krimineller als Deutsche, and then on the other side of the Bierdeckel, the government printed information that dispelled this prejudice. Die Statistik zeigt, Zuwanderer sind nicht krimineller als Deutsche. Another socially provocative coaster invites its reader/drinker to consider the following complacent comment. Wir können doch nicht alle Probleme dieser Welt lösen, oder? By the way, the word oder, which comes after the comma, is what linguists call a tag question. You can use oder after a statement in order to solicit feedback or a response from the person you're addressing. It's like saying, right? Or, isn't that right? For example, back when I was a young lad in Germany and I still had quite a bit of an American English accent when I spoke German, I was often asked, Sie kommen aus den USA, oder? Anyway, keep your ears perked because in our journey here, we'll be hearing this oder in the tag question quite a bit. Now, there are two reasons that I'm using this Bierdeckel's social message for this lesson. First, most of us really do hope that we can solve this world's problems. And second, this message also is going to serve as a segue to our first grammar topic, namely, modal verbs. So let's look again at this socially provocative statement. Wir können doch nicht alle Probleme dieser Welt lösen. The modal verb here is können. It means to be able to or can. And it's conjugated with the subject wir. Wir können. But let's take a closer look at the word order of this sentence. There's something new for us here. When we plug it into our word position model, it looks like this. The subject wir is in the first position. The modal verb können is in the second position. And in the third position, we actually have three items. An intensification particle, doch, followed by the negation particle, nicht. And then we have the object, which here is actually the entire phrase, alle Probleme dieser Welt. For the moment, let's set aside the particles doch and nicht. This leaves us with the construction, wir können alle Probleme dieser Welt. So far then, this is nothing new, right? We have the same subject-verb-object order that we've already learned. However, there's still something funny about this construction, right? I mean, we can't just leave it as wir können alle Probleme dieser Welt, which in English would be we can all the problems of this world. Clearly, this construction needs one more thing to make it complete. It needs a main verb, which in this sentence is lösen. You see, just like when we use a modal verb in English, the German modal verb können needs a main verb to make sense. Here, that main verb is lösen, to solve. And as we can see, lösen both stays in the infinitive form and it comes at the end of the sentence. It comes in what we're going to call the fourth slot of the WPM. Now, if we translated this sentence literally, it would go, we can all problems of this world solve. Wir können alle Probleme dieser Welt lösen. But of course, this wouldn't be English, right? It's more like Germish or Denglish. So a better translation in English would be, we can solve all the problems of this world. That would be nice. And when we put those two particles together in the sentence, doch and nicht, we get, we can't really solve all the problems of this world. Wir können doch nicht alle Probleme dieser Welt lösen. Schade. So then, syntactically, this is how all German modal verbs work when you use them in a main clause. First, the modal verb comes in the second position. Second, the modal verb is conjugated with the subject. Third, the modal verb is almost always complemented with a main verb in its infinitive form. And fourth, this main verb in its infinitive form gets moved to the end of the sentence. Nun, sadly, meine Damen und Herren, it's time to say Auf Wiedersehen to our Bierdeckel and instead turn our attention to the remaining modal verbs in German. Entschuldigung. Also dann, let's start with the modal verb dürfen, which means to be allowed to. Here's how we conjugate it. Ich darf, du darfst, Sie dürfen, sie es darf, wir dürfen, ihr dürft, Sie dürfen, and Sie dürfen. Notice that dürfen has somewhat of an irregular conjugation. It takes a vowel change for du and sie es, and there's no e suffix for the ich and no t suffix for the sie es. In fact, the other modal verbs follow a similar conjugational pattern. Können, for example, is conjugated as ich kann, du kannst, Sie können, sie es kann, wir können, ihr könnt, Sie können, and Sie können. Our next modal verb is mögen, to like, which is conjugated as ich mag, du magst, Sie mögen, sie es mag, wir mögen, ihr mögt, Sie mögen, and Sie mögen. Actually, speakers of German often use an alternate form of mögen, namely möchten. Möchten translates to would like or would like to. So a child on vacation might say to his mom, Mutti, ich möchte schwimmen. Or, Mutti, ich möchte Eis essen. And yes, the German word for ice cream really is das Eis. The general word for ice is also das Eis. So in a restaurant, you can order eine Cola mit Eis. Ich möchte eine Cola mit Eis. Or eine Cola ohne Eis. Better yet, you could say, ich möchte eine Cola ohne oder mit Eis haben. Now, unlike its close relative mögen, the conjugation of möchten is almost completely regular. Ich möchte, du möchtest, Sie möchten, sie es möchte, wir möchten, ihr möchtet, Sie möchten, and Sie möchten. The only thing to note is that there is no t suffix when you conjugate möchten for sie es. Sie möchte Physik studieren. Möchte Deutsch lernen. Okay. There are 3 more modal verbs we need to go over, and then we'll see how they work in real-world conversation. Alles klar? The next modal verb is müssen, which we can translate as either to have to or must. Its conjugation is also a little irregular. Ich muss, du musst, Sie müssten, sie es muss, wir müssten, ihr müsst, Sie müssten, and Sie müssen. Notice the umlaut, there or not there. 2 more modal verbs to go. Next up, we have sollen, which we can translate as to be supposed to or should. Its conjugation is more regular than the others. Ich soll, du sollst, Sie sollen, sie es soll, wir sollen, ihr sollt, Sie sollen, and Sie sollen. Finally, our last modal verb is wollen, which means to want to. We conjugate wollen as follows. Ich will, du willst, Sie wollen, sie es will, wir wollen, ihr wollt, Sie wollen, and Sie wollen. Und das ist alles, meine Damen und Herren. We can now spice up our German by modifying our main verbs with a dürfen, können, möchten, müssen, sollen, or wollen. So, let's put it all together and let's see how modal verbs really work, using an actual dialogue performed by none other than our trusted native speaker friends, Ralf and Mia Gruber. This time, the title of their dialogue is Mia und Ralf fahren nach Island. Okay, not a particularly inspiring title, but it's accurate because Ralf and Mia are going to Iceland. And in preparation for their trip, they need to buy some warm Kleidung and a few Toilettenartikel. Also dann, Herr und Frau Gruber, bitteschön.
Was sollen wir für die Reise nach Island kaufen?
Wir müssen warme Kleidung kaufen.
Gute Idee.
Ich brauche eine Jacke und einen Pullover.
Darf ich auch neue Schuhe bekommen?
Ja, Ralf, du darfst auch neue Schuhe bekommen.
Großartig.
Wir sollten auch ein paar Toilettenartikel besorgen.
Echt? Was brauchen wir?
Naja, ich brauche Zahnpasta, eine Zahnbürste, ein Stück Seife, eine kleine Flasche Shampoo, eine Haarbürste und Taschentücher. Was brauchst du?
Ach so. Ja, ich muss auch eine Zahnbürste kaufen. Außerdem brauche ich Rasierklingen, Rasierschaum, Duschgel und Gesichtscreme.
Gut. Möchtest du zu Fuß gehen oder mit dem Auto zum Supermarkt fahren?
Ich möchte zu Fuß gehen.
Vielen Dank, Herr und Frau Gruber, und viel Spaß in Island. Also dann, now that we've learned all the modal verbs in German and how they work, let's switch gears and focus some more on building our active vocabulary. It's high time that we learn how to say the months, die Monate, the seasons, die Jahrezeiten, and the days of the week, die Wochentage. Alles klar? Schön. Los geht's. We're going to start with autumn, der Herbst. Die Monate im Herbst sind September, Oktober und November. By the way, all the months, seasons, and days of the week are masculine in German. Next, we have winter, der Winter. Und die Monate im Winter sind Dezember, Januar und Februar. After der Winter, we have spring, der Frühling. Und die Monate im Frühling sind März, April und Mai. And finally, we have many people's Lieblingsjahreszeit, der Sommer. Und die Monate im Sommer sind Juni, Juli und August. Schön, das sind die Jahreszeiten und die Monate. So then, what's your favorite time of the year? Entschuldigung, das muss ich auf Deutsch sagen. Also dann, was ist Ihre Lieblingsjahreszeit? Der Winter, der Sommer, der Herbst oder der Frühling? This is my favorite time of year. Meine Lieblingsjahreszeit ist der Winter. Ich gehe gern auf dem Eis angeln. Und ich fahre gern Ski. What's your favorite month? Was ist Ihr Lieblingsmonat? Der Oktober? Der Dezember? Der Juli? Mein Lieblingsmonat ist der September. Im September gehe ich gern Äpfel pflücken. Und im September gehen wir gern wandern. Speaking of going ice fishing, going apple picking, and going hiking, this reminds me of another important grammar note. When we pair the verb gehen with another verb like fahren, angeln, pflücken, or wandern to express the notion of to go skiing, to go fishing, and so on, the verb gehen works just like a modal verb. We put it in the second position of our sentence, we conjugate it with our subject, and then our supplemental main verb comes at the end of the sentence and stays in the infinitive. Take the following statement. Im Winter gehen wir gern auf dem Eis angeln. Our adverb of time is in the first position, followed by our first verb, gehen, which we conjugate with our subject wir, in the third position. In the fourth position, we include our complements of manner and place, gern, auf dem Eis. And at the end of the sentence, we put in our second verb in its infinitive form, angeln. Im Winter gehen wir gern auf dem Eis angeln. In the winter, we like to go fishing on the ice. Which is true, am I right? Im Winter gehen Sie gern auf dem Eis angeln. Wie bitte? Ach so, im Winter gehen Sie nicht gern auf dem Eis angeln? Ach, das ist schade. Anyway, let's keep building our active vocabulary. We've covered die Jahrezeiten and die Monate. But of course, months are also made up of days of the week. Die Wochentage, also referred to as die Tage, plural, or der Tag, singular. But before we start, I have another trivia question for you. And I promise you'll know the answer to this one. Also dann, meine Damen und Herren, hier ist die Frage. Wie viele Wochentage gibt es? Richtig, es gibt 7 Wochentage. So then, let's go over these 7 Wochentage right now. We'll start with what is, of course, everybody's Lieblingswochentag, their favorite day of the week. Can you guess? Montag. After Montag, we have Dienstag, followed by Mittwoch, Donnerstag, and Freitag. As for the days on the weekend, das Wochenende, we have Samstag and Sonntag. Alles klar? As we can see, some of the Wochentage are clear cognates, Montag, Freitag, and Sonntag, while others are harder to recognize cognates. Donnerstag actually comes from Thor's day, as in the Nordic god of thunder, Thor. And we can still recognize this in English as Thursday. The words Dienstag and Samstag are also cognates, believe it or not, but the history here is a bit too complicated to explain. Mittwoch, however, is not cognate with English's Wednesday at all. Mittwoch actually translates to midweek because, well, Wednesday is in the middle of the week, right? Also dann, meine Damen und Herren, for the last part of our lesson, I want us to return to an important grammar topic that we went over a few lessons ago, namely the accusative. Recall that the accusative is a grammatical case which expresses the direct object in a sentence. Consider the sentence, am Freitag muss Frau Gruber viele Toilettenartikel besorgen. The accusative direct object is viele Toilettenartikel, because it's what the nominative subject Frau Gruber has to get. In other words, we've learned that the subjects in a sentence are expressed with the nominative case, and that objects in a sentence are expressed with the accusative case. Remember? Well, what we need to add here now are 2 additional situations where German requires us to use the accusative. First, with certain phrases of time, and second, after a particular group of prepositions, which are fittingly called accusative prepositions. Let's start with the phrases of time. Basically, it boils down to this. When we use a noun or noun phrase to express duration of time, we put that noun in the accusative. For example, we might say, Ich bleibe den ganzen Tag im Bett. I stay in bed all day long, or for the entire day. Or maybe we would say, Jeden Sommer fliege ich nach Österreich. Every summer, I fly to Austria. In these utterances, the noun phrases den ganzen Tag and jeden Sommer function less like nouns and more like adverbs of time. Therefore, we put them in the accusative. Now, we could also use these same noun phrases as the subject in our sentence, like this. Der ganze Tag ist schlecht. The entire day is bad. Or, Jeder Sommer ist fantastisch. Every summer is fantastic. Now, because the phrases der ganze Tag and jeder Sommer are now the subjects and not adverbial nouns expressing time, they stay in the nominative case. In fact, the accusative of time tends to occur after der words like dies and jed. Here are some common phrases that we might want to learn by heart. Diesen Monat, jeden Monat, dieses Jahr, jedes Jahr, diese Woche, jede Woche, diesen Sommer, jeden Sommer, diesen Winter, jeden Winter, and jeden Tag. In addition, the accusative of time commonly occurs together with the adjectives ganz, next, and letzt. Notice the little hyphens there at the end of each word? Well, this means that these adjectives take certain endings. For instance, with masculine nouns like der Monat, we would say den ganzen Monat, nächsten Monat, and letzten Monat. With neuter nouns like das Jahr, we would say das ganze Jahr, nächstes Jahr, and letztes Jahr. As for feminine nouns like die Woche, we would say die ganze Woche, nächste Woche, and letzte Woche. Also dann, meine Damen und Herren, at this point, believe it or not, we can now say and understand all kinds of new sentences. Sentences like these. Nächsten Winter will ich auf dem Eis angeln gehen. Dieses Jahr muss ich nach Österreich fahren. And of course, jeden Tag soll ich mein Deutsch üben. Das ist fantastisch, oder? Now, don't go anywhere just yet. There's still one more linguistic situation where German requires us to use the accusative case. Namely, after an accusative preposition. First, I want to point out that actually we have prepositions in English too, and as a matter of fact, they also change the case of the nouns they modify. For example, we would never say, this present is for she, or we are against they. The words for and against are prepositions, and so they change the case of the pronouns she and they to her and them. This present is for her. We are against them. Basically, prepositions in German do the same thing. And guess what? There are 7 such prepositions that make the noun or pronoun they precede accusative. Bis, durch, entlang, für, gegen, ohne, and Any noun or pronoun that comes immediately after one of these prepositions, in what's called a prepositional phrase, has to be in the accusative case. For example, we can take leave from a friend by telling them, bis nächste Woche. Or, if it's a friend we only see, let's say, once a year at summer camp, we could say, bis nächsten Sommer. In both of these phrases, the nouns, Woche and Sommer, are in the accusative because of that preposition bis. Okay, here's another example. Imagine it's a beautiful sunny day out. Die Sonne scheint, der Himmel ist blau und es ist Badewetter. And instead of staying inside on that couch all day, you say to yourself, nein, ich will nicht den ganzen Tag im Haus bleiben. Ich möchte einen Spaziergang durch den Park machen. And so you put on your Turnschuhe and off you go. Los geht's. First, you walk entlang die Straße, then die Ecke, and then there's the park. Und sie gehen durch den Park spazieren. Moment mal, ich habe eine Idee. Let's get Ralf and Mia back in here one last time to show us how accusative prepositions work in a native speaker conversational situation. And this time, we'll give their dialogue an actual title that's more interesting. Ein Geschenk für dich. Das ist ein schöner Titel, oder? Also dann, los geht's.
Ich habe ein Geschenk für dich.
Für mich?
Ja, dieses Geschenk ist aber auch für die ganze Familie. Das ist eine neue Anstecknadel.
Ralf Gruber.
Was ist los? Das ist dein Lebensmotto. Jeder Tag ist ein Geschenk.
Ja, das ist mein Lebensmotto. Aber der letzte Teil?
Ach so, ja, manchmal ist er nur miserabel verpackt.
Ralf.
Ohne den letzten Teil ist es
Ja, was?
ein bisschen alltäglich.
Alltäglich? Willst du sagen, du bist gegen mein Lebensmotto?
Nein, Schatz, jeden Morgen höre ich gern. Weißt du, Ralf, jeder Tag ist ein Geschenk.
Ja und? Dieses Motto ist wichtig. Wir sollen es durch jeden Tag, ja durch das ganze Leben tragen.
Genau, und jetzt kannst du dein Lebensmotto jeden Tag auch wirklich tragen.
Sehr witzig.
Vielen Dank, Herr und Frau Gruber. Don't forget that this dialogue, along with all the dialogues from our lesson, is reprinted for you in Chapter 11 of the workbook. And remember our favorite saying, Übung macht den Meister. Also dann, meine Damen und Herren, it's time to wrap up die 11. Lektion. But before we say our customary Auf Wiedersehen and bis gleich, I would like to leave you with one more trivia question. Wann beginnt das Oktoberfest? Jeden August, jeden September oder jeden Oktober? In the next lesson, we'll learn the answer, which just might surprise you. Auf Wiedersehen und bis gleich.